Okay. Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome to the Vicinity and Beyond podcast with me, Henry Jinman.
And me, Julie Grail.
And we are back to continue where we left off for our third part of what makes a good bid, or what makes a bid good. And in the first part, we looked at the characteristics of a good bid. In the second part, we looked at the standards that the bid needed to adhere to. And in this third one, we are looking at the metrics, the measurements. How do we evidence that we are doing all of the aforementioned things and giving value to our bid members? Before we do jump into that, we had some good comments and conversation on some of the posts. And I just wanted to pick up some of those that we've had with you, Julie, and give you a chance to respond more fully than perhaps we can do online.
Yeah, that's great.
So, should we start with Carolyn? Carolyn Brownell for Cardiff. She commented that she's fortunate. They're a big bid. They can afford to pay for consultants and experts to advise them. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but smaller bid teams, smaller bid boards, they might be missing skills, expertise, and they're potentially vulnerable. She says it's not about ignorance. It's not an excuse. It's more just the reality of how tough it is to run those smaller bids.
Yeah, it's a really good point that Carolyn made. And I should say, actually, it's been great how much feedback we've had from these podcasts generally and how many people are referencing us and are asking us things. And so it's great that people are listening. It's great that it's useful. I think Carolyn's point's really well made that across regions, you often have a very large bid that might have the budget and the wherewithal to do these things, but often a lot of satellite bids around it. And it really relies on particularly a bit of collegiate spirit to actually support your sort of satellite bids around you through regional networks. And some of the regions are really active and some are less so. But it's also, sort of partly why we're doing this, isn't it? Because we're trying to provide the conversation to allow people to identify what more they do need to know. And this is free. So that helps the smaller bids.
Absolutely. And one of the things that a lot of the comments were about bid boards.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting, people saying, we want to share with our boards some of the videos that we're producing. So we are going to do we're going to try and keep it short, 10-minute for bid board members as part of this mini series. And instead of addressing perhaps the bid managers, the operational teams that we're often probably speaking more to, we're going to do one specifically for bid board members. So hopefully that is an additional bit of resource that you can share with.
And hopefully it's helpful to the bid managers. Hopefully we don't drop them in it.
And so Jill says she'd love to get a turnout of 50%. And that was, of course, the goal. But she says the current balance system makes it harder than it should be.
Yeah, so this is Jill from Milton Keynes, and I completely agree and concur with her, and it's a really valid point she makes. And I think it's a conversation that lots of us have all the time, the kind of mechanics around the process, but also the interpretation of the regs. So there's a series of things that kind of prevent us getting or make it harder to get a good turnout, and that's data accuracy in the first place. It's process, which I'll come back to. It's Royal Mail is quite a problem these days, and a bit of apathy. The more established the bid becomes, the less active or proactive your voters, your bid levy payers are to vote for you, because it's sort of a given that you're there, and that's a kind of piece of work in its own right. But just coming back to the process point for a minute, those of us that have done loads and loads of ballots from the beginning, there's some kind of, good practice and workarounds and stuff to try and make the turnout as high as possible. But it is hard because there's question marks around voter list creation. I've got this going on in a number of places at the moment where the regulations say that the voter list originates from the rating list. It doesn't say it is the rating list. And many interpret more broadly. Some are interpreting very, very tightly. But it gets you to do two things. So it gets you to, in Schedule 2 of the regulations, it specifically identifies two separate things. It identifies who the voter the person entitled to vote is, and that's referred to as the business ratepayer who's liable for the bid levy. And then the second thing is the address that the ballot paper gets sent to. And the address refers to local hereditament address or principal place of business for the company that's going to pay the bid levy. Now, just picking up the point of paying the bid levy is really critical at the moment, because I've got one location that's really struggling with this. That is not the business ratepayer for a multinational business. That's not that person who's going to pay the bid levy. It's definitely not the chief executive of a national business who's based in, I don't know, Coventry, when the bid might be in, I don't know, Southampton. So often now, the bid levy is paid off the P&L of the company locally, whether it's a subsidiary of a big company, of a multinational, of a national, whether it's an independent, it's paid often off the P&L locally. So the person entitled to vote, i.e. the person liable for the bid levy, is the person locally in that place. So my default position on a bid ballot creating a voter list is always now the manager at local hereditament address. And where we can get names, that's confirmed through a written audit trail, and where we can't, it just goes to the manager. That's causing problems in places. And if you can't get that ruling to ensure a ballot paper goes locally, you will get a low turnout and you will prevent people from voting. And that's really quite problematic. And I make no judgment about whether these are yes voters or no voters. For me, it's about turnout. And there's a couple of other things that sort of are going on. So some local authorities do a pre-ballot canvass on that. So the local authority themselves, before the notice of ballot goes out, does a complete mailing that goes out first to the contact on the ratepayer list and then tries to kind of circumvent and work out where it's going. In principle, that's a good idea. But of course, in practice, most of those people are not going to be the liable party for the levy and therefore aren't going to take any notice of it because it's not their problem. Westminster have gone one step further, and they actually have digital registration. So they don't have digital voting because we can't have that yet, but they do have a digital registration. So you can actually go and confirm your own voter details, which is an amazing step forward and is really the precursor to get digital voting. So that's really, really, really good. But Jill's right. It is really, really difficult to get through all these hoops, particularly if you end up in a location where the interpretation of the regulations is ridiculously tight, such that nobody can get a ballot paper. And that's a problem.
It'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it, if your turnout is 50%, but how many people actually were you able to reach and get a ballot paper to successfully, which may be 70%, in which case you managed to get 50% of 70%, not 50% of 100% is probably a more accurate way of viewing.
And that's sort of the point that Jill's coming back to about 50%, because often the reason you can only achieve 40 or 50% is because only 60% even got hold of a paper, let alone did anything with it. And then the trying to get the rest a paper, A, they're already apathetic, B, they're off-site somewhere, C, they're independent businesses that are happy and not challenging it. You know, there's a whole load of reasons. And it's the hoops you have to jump through to get a business to actively ask for a voting paper and then eventually vote it's disproportionate. And these businesses, many of them just say, oh, can't you do it for us? We want the bid. We don't want to do this. And they don't understand the level of bureaucracy required just to get them on the list, let alone get the ballot paper and then get them to return it.
I did wonder whether this was going to be quite a sort of boring, technical, logistical question here, but actually this is fundamental.
You know, it really is.
Bid works and the credibility of a democratic process. Identifying who the voters are in a place and getting them right.
And as I say, I'm not naming places at the moment, but those that are dealing with this problem, they know just how painful this is, and that only 30% of their list is local, and they can't get a commitment to get the 70% sent locally, so they're in danger of only having 30% of ballot papers live and available to be returned. And then that questions what level of turnout they can get, doesn't it?
Interesting. Very okay. Digital registration. I'm going to look into that as well. And Sophie Alexander, she said, bids must be careful about tick boxing when creating boards. How many use a skills matrix, sectors, geographical considerations? What's your experience?
Yeah, and I think Sophie's been really active actually on responding on our podcast. She's been one of the people that's been putting loads of comments on, which is really good. So thank you, Sophie. But yeah, she's right. Again, there's a sort of balance to strike between. I like having the principle of a skills matrix alongside sector and geography, and some looseness as well within the places, so that you don't get forced into a position where you take people and can't take other people who are going to be great because they don't fit the narrow box, and end up with a list of 12 people or 13 people on a board list, but only 6 actively come and say anything and get involved. And that's the worst kind of board. And I will always, when I'm directly involved with bids, tap everybody on the shoulder who's on the board list and encourage them. If they're not attending, we'll just strike them off.
Yeah.
And they can either send somebody else or they can decline and we'll get somebody else.
Presumably an article provision, is it? That you can, if you don't attend.
Yeah, normally three strikes and you're out. But most bids don't use it. Most bids go, oh, I can't do that. No, you have to do that because you need an active board. The whole point of having a board of 13 is to use 13 brains, not to use 6 and let the rest not turn up.
It's the manner in which it's done, I suppose, isn't it? So, how do you do that in a way where...
Well, I mean, I do it politely.
Yes. We should address that in our episode, directing at bid
we should.
board members.
We should.
And we will tell them on your behalf that you need to be coming to consecutive meetings, and if you miss 3, you're out.
Quite.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, Carolyn, Jill, and Sophie, and all those that have commented. Please do, and we will try and bring your questions and comments into our discussions here as well. So let's get on to today's topic. What does a good bid look like anyway, and how are we measuring the success? Now, lots of the things we mentioned last time, the 6 characteristics, being representative, showing integrity, being visible, responsive, innovative. Some of these things are harder to measure than others. Some of them probably slightly easier. What can we tick off and quite quickly and say, these are things that are done?
Yeah, I mean, I think we went through those 6 characteristics, and so much of it is more about the kind of back end of the organisation, the way in which we operate and our values and our processes. So it's about how we are representative communicating with people. It's about how we bring integrity to our processes and team dynamics and decisions and everything else, the visibility out there on the ground, the responsiveness of feedback in and what we do with that, and being innovative. The one that's really so much more depth that we're going to pick up today is evidence-based decisions on the front end of a bid. What do we deliver and how do we measure that? And that's what I'm really interested in delving more deeply. I often talk to bids when I meet bids for the first time, particularly ahead of a renewal ballot, and I'm trying to get under the skin of what they've done and what difference they've made. I talk about a matrix of input and output, and that sort of then is what tees up how we start delving into the detail of it.
That's the question that we often get asked, I suppose. Well, that's the question we think about a lot when we are delivering our solutions, is how do we help bids answer that question? What has a bid ever done for me?
Yeah.
So I'm going to try my best.
It's a game, isn't it?
It is.
It's another game.
I'm going to jump over the fence, and I'm going to become a bid manager for the next 20 minutes.
Good luck with that.
And I've got all sorts of exciting ideas for my town.
Okay.
And I'm going to put them to you, and I'd like you to challenge me on them to make sure that I'm making evidence-based decisions in what I'm planning, how I'm delivering it, and ultimately whether we can review whether it's worked afterwards.
Okay.
So the first exciting project I have on my list, coming to the end of winter, and I just want to try and get a light festival in. while the nights are still long. So that's my first project.
Okay. Oh, and very, very timely and appropriate, because there's lots around at the moment. There's been some great ones in the last couple of months. Bristol did a fantastic one a couple of years ago that lots of us then went to the showcase, which I think has inspired lots of people. Leamington have just done a brilliant one in the last couple of weeks. So have Leicester. Anyway, so there's some great stuff out there.
Yeah.
I guess the first question back to you is, why do you want to do a light festival? Are you doing it because everyone else is?
I'm inspired. I like to see what everyone else is doing, and I've seen evidence that running a light festival will bring lots of people into town and city centres, and I think as a result, they will visit the businesses and they will come, they'll go around, they will view some nice sculptures, and they will go and eat and drink and hopefully be merry and spend some money.
Okay, so who is your target audience then? If you're saying, because obviously by the nature of a light festival, they've got to go whilst it's dark.
Yep.
So it's not your daytime businesses, presumably. So who's your target audience?
In terms of who I think's going to...
Who's going to benefit?
Who's going to benefit? So I'm thinking about nighttime food and drink.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about the community at large as well. I think I want an event which is going to bring in residents, but maybe those who are going to travel a little bit further, who wouldn't necessarily come into the town or the city. So to highlight what we have to offer. But I think in terms of measuring my ROI, I'm looking at food and drink in the evening.
Okay. And as a percentage of you, and you'll have to make this up for the purposes of this podcast, as a percentage...
We haven't rehearsed any of this.
No, I know. That's why it's quite amusing, isn't it? Because you're looking really worried about what I'm going to ask you. As a percentage of your levy income, how much comes from food and drink?
Well, it's about 30%.
Oh, is it that high? That's quite high.
Yes, we're really
okay.
I like something.
Maybe it's justified then. And should the businesses be funding something directly for residents? What's the logic of the residents having that service?
It's the link,
isn't it the council should be paying for it?
Well, it's funny you say that, because we're going to partner with the council.
Okay.
They'd like to be involved as well. They've got some ideas around the public spaces, and
surely they haven't got any money.
They are willing to help with the risk assessment and the liability for the installations.
Okay.
And we are going to commission the artwork and deal with the comms with the public. But I guess the link is, if I can bring people into the place, the business is going to benefit from spending money.
Yeah. And actually, you've picked up a couple of points that are really important there, that something like a light festival, there is so much complexity sort of below the line in terms of permissions, in terms of liabilities on site for kit, often then requiring overnight security surveillance to keep it safe, which can massively increase the cost of these things instantly. And then considering what insurance provisions are required, and if the bid carries the liability whilst the kit is on site, then revisiting your own insurance policy, and that will carry a cost.
Yep.
So the costs start escalating for something that starts as quite a nice low-cost project because of all the additional elements. And that's sort of, part of the evidence-based decision thing of when you're putting this light project to your board, all of those things have got to be in there. And the board have got to need to ask those questions often. And we'll pick this up in our board podcast separately, but often the board don't ask those questions, and therefore the bid staff don't provide those answers, but they absolutely need answering. So what's your cost? What's your likely kind of payback? Have you got figures?
So I think something like this, it's quite heavy cost, isn't it? I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands, not tens of thousands, to implement this properly. So it probably is quite a big task for a bid to do on its own. And having gone to Leicester and seen the Leicester Light Trail, and we provided an app to help people navigate around the trail and to help people move around the city so that different areas benefit. It was interesting to see how many different partners had come together in that city to do it. And the mayor was speaking, and the arts different groups. The bid had a key role when it had come to communicating the marketing of the event, and for the benefit of the businesses. But one of the key things was, I think, how do the businesses benefit, especially if bringing in things like external food and drink market traders, those kind of things for the event. That I think is one of the potential conflict areas to make sure that you're benefiting for that footfall for those those businesses. How are the costs? So, I mean, you've got your. I'd be guessing here, but I'm guessing we're talking about hundreds of thousands of costs. So I've got to expect, tens of thousands of people to visit, and I would imagine. Do I survey? Would I survey that evening and see how many people have eaten out? And
definitely. And there's a kind of pre and a during and a post as well on these things, because if you're going to do such a large scale project, I mean, I suppose Leamington's done it at a relatively low cost and made a massive difference because they haven't got big budgets. But still, I know the extras of security and insurance and everything all added on top. I don't know what their final figure was. Apologies, Steph. I think it might have been between 50 and 70k in the end they spent. But yes, you that piece of the jigsaw is the critical piece, but it's what else can you do to really make it fly and make the difference of not just the classic thing that we always used to be criticised for and a Christmas light switch on is you bring all these people in and all the shops are closed during that time, so we can't benefit anyway, and it just costs an enormous amount of money and there's no payback. Well, there is if you use it well enough and you create the linkages between those customers, those potential customers, before, during and after. So how do you do an app on the night or the series of nights to capture the customer database, to be able to communicate again, to be able to offer discounts to them for other things, to be able to connect them up to other things. This is the piece that creates
legacy, isn't it?
a much bigger marketing and comms effort. And that sort of comes back to then the staff resource. What level of staff resource have you got in your bid? Is it just you or have you got other people? Because the scale of effort around the marketing and comms piece, again, to get it done well, it's massive. Like, I'll give you the example of Leeds bid, the Christmas lights things that they've done. They've done twice over now. Last year's one was fabulous gingerbread house projected onto the big hotels. It was absolutely fantastic. But the resource that's gone into it, they've got a reasonably big team, but you need that scale of team to do that kind of effort. So it's balancing up how many people might come, what's your likely target audience, what days of the week are you attracting them, and when and why, what's the customer transport routes, who are your hinterland, if they're coming in the car, are the car parks open at night? If they are, like, have you got the pricing subsidised or adjusted to ensure is an enticement for people to come? If it's by train and bus, do they even run? It's all of this, so much more associated with doing the light sculptures, but actually making it happen and making it fly. And then going back to the measuring, you absolutely captured the people on the night numbers, but who, where from, originating postcodes, what percentage kind of uplifts did individual food and drink operators have? Some of the food and drink trails that go on now, using your app particularly, there's some fantastic uplift on particular specialist trails that go on. It completely pays for itself. It's so easy to demonstrate it pays for itself. You can't do that too frequently because otherwise it doesn't have the novelty. But on these kind of things, if you design it well, yes, you can really evidence that uplift. But I go back to the original point. As a balance of proportion of budget from the bid that you're proposing to use, how does that reflect back to the percentage levy coming from that sector? Now, it doesn't have to match identically, but if you've only got 20% food and drink and you're going to use 80% of your budget on a nighttime, that's a bit extreme, but on a nighttime activity, your daytime levy payers are going to hold on a minute. I don't think that feels quite right.
It's that's obviously where the hard metrics are going to come from, where we can say, here's been the clear return on investment. I suppose I could make an argument, and I can, drawing on Leicester, they had amazing display which told the history of Leicester throughout the light trail. And standing there watching it, I didn't know this stuff. And
Yeah.
I left with a very positive
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
And marketing people often will make this claim, you can't measure everything.
Yeah.
But what is that worth that
Yeah.
people go there, leave with a positive feeling of the place, and therefore think, oh, do you know what, next time I will go in and during the day and I will shop there. So I can't measure that. I can't say what the impact of that
And
is.
there is, as you say,
but I
there is a bit of
believe
a hearts and minds of that bit, but you've got to have enough metrics around it to feel like it's not just on that.
Yes.
It's not just gut.
Because I've got to justify that to those businesses that are saying we weren't open at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Hopefully I did okay, and my first project that I've tried to run as a bid manager there. So
Well, to be honest, I hope you've run one before you run a light festival, because that's quite complex. So if you chose that one as your first one, I think that's probably not a great idea.
Maybe
do an easier one first.
Maybe my next one's a little bit simpler. I have an area in my town where people are walking through, but there's no seating. And I'm interested in putting in some public realm seating, the space, so that people can sit and enjoy. It's quite a nice space and I think people are going to spend more time there. I think it's going to encourage older members of society, give them a place to stop. I think people who are going to go out on their lunch break from work, and it's going to encourage them to, instead of eating at their desk, to go and grab a sandwich, and then they're going to sit on the bench. I don't know if there's a video, I'll have to share it on this and with you, which talked about all the different ways that people used a table tennis table in a public park area.
Oh, really?
None of them used it as a table tennis table.
No, because you can't contain the ball, can you?
But all these different members of the community had used it, and the person lived opposite and filmed it. And just by having a piece of furniture in a public space, how people congregate, I thought it was immensely positive. And so I'm going to put some seating, and I'm going to put a table tennis table in.
Okay. And you think this is easier than the last one, do you?
It seemed simpler when I started.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a great idea of a project. And yes, in so many ways we would love to and do things like this. But my goodness, they can get tricky and complex, because it's about what public space actually exists and how far away is it, what width of footway is there? Are there actually open public spaces? How far away are they from the highway? So sight lines for cars, sight lines on pavements for blind people, disabled people, you have to leave a certain width. So there's only certain places you can even start thinking about these things. And if you do, then there's some great routes to doing this, but you need a permission. So you need permissions from your local authority. You're highly likely to have to provide a management plan as part of the permission to demonstrate what you're going to do when your nice person from their office above comes and eats the sandwich there. They're unlikely to make any mess. You might have quite a lot of mess overnight when somebody thinks it's a great idea to use it as a skateboarding ramp, or to sleep on it because they've got nowhere to sleep, or to do a whole variety of other things on it and cause noise disturbance to residents above during evening and nighttime hours. So your council will probably ask you then to put a management plan in place, and how will you then remedy the noise pollution, litter build-up, breakages, damage, and all the other things that they have. So how do you deal with that bit?
Well, they're ruining my plan is what I'd say. Interesting.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, I'm not being facetious. It's a real problem that
I need to think beyond the initial installation to continuing to manage the space.
Yeah, so the cost of putting the seating in is, again, sort of the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Because there's so much pre, during and after. And councils actually quite often are reluctant to let us, anybody actually, let alone bids, put anything on their land, because they ultimately take the responsibility. They don't want to trust somebody else to manage it. And so it just adds a burden to them, a cost burden to them, which is a shame because we should be able to have these things. In some cases, we've got some great examples of it. There's a great example of a project we're doing actually currently in Fitzrovia Partnership called Fits and Sits. And it's part of the London Festival of Architecture. And it's a seating trail of 9 design-led, so young architect-led design pieces that are in their own right a piece of public art, and each one is seating.
Okay.
But 5 are in one authority and 4 in another, and we're going through enormous amount of hoops actually to satisfy everybody that the design is okay, the location is okay, the fabrication is okay, the management plans are okay, and then we, from a bid point of view, are working out after the event, once we get permissions, how we look after them for the 3 months. They're only going in for 3 months. They're part of the London Festival of Architecture
Right, wow.
summer trail. So they're only in for 3 months, and the workload is significant.
And so I'm swapping over into your role here. How do you evidence to the businesses that with your input-output matrix that...
So we've had, I mean, part of the motivation for this one is part of a much bigger project where we've had a load of consultation and like co-creation of a sustainability strategy and action plan, and a whole series of public realm opportunities across the district. One of the things identified was very, very limited seating across the entire area. So there was a desire to see something. So it's been kind of combined, the creativity of the LFA Festival of Architecture stuff with the need in the area, and then building in the sustainability aspect that all the fabrication is from sustainable materials, etc. But we've got each actual seating, each fabrication is sponsored by a business. It's not levy-payer money funding it.
Interesting.
We've got levy-payer money funding for the kind of creation and development of the process, and for supporting the management process of asking for the approvals and permissions and everything, and put the management panel in place. And our team and support team on the ground will be doing the looking after them when they're on site, but it's not levy-payer money paying for it.
I think this is really highlighting for me is how innovative like some of these solutions are, where it's a trail, it's architecture, it's arts. You're encouraging people to move around the place, and it's seating, and the funding mechanisms. If you've taken putting a seat,
I know,
and it's amazing, and we see bids doing this all the time and being innovative in the way they do this. But
and an extra angle on it, actually, interestingly, is and this is the kind of sad indictment of what we have to deal with. 2 or 3 of the design schemes have planting in them, and we've just had the debate this week. Sorry, team, if you end up listening to this and I've sort of gone cart before the horse, but we've had the discussion about whether we can have planting in them, because as soon as you put planting in, you've got another level of risk that we've got to mitigate against, because you might have some really nice little old ladies who enjoy the planting, but you'll also have some other people that will decide they're going to have that for their window box, and they pinch it overnight. So how many times would we have to replace the planting, and where would we keep the replacement plants, anticipating that we're going to have to replace a load? So we're actually wondering whether it's easier not to have plants, which seems a terrible shame, doesn't it, in this world of trying to create biodiversity?
Yeah. And the tricky thing with this, I think, is this idea of beautification. And because we know that if you live in beautiful spaces with nice architecture, that it's good for health and well-being for people. I guess then how are you tying that back to the evidence-based decision? You're spending money from a group of businesses in a place. I suppose you could have a small town that's going for Britain in bloom that actually really invests in this stuff, really invests in the horticulture and botany and plants, and actually because they're going for a prize or an award which will put them on a map within a certain group of people, which will make them a destination. I mean, I'm sort of taking it another way.
Yeah.
In my town, that's our plan. We're with
Yeah.
our,
Oh, is it? Okay.
with planting is we're going for a Britain in Bloom award, and I think that's going to really
that
be a
one brings
marketing
me out in a
boom.
bit of a cold sweat.
Oh no.
I've done quite a lot of planting schemes in my time, and there are some great examples. And some of the people listening will go, "Well, we've won a gold award and it's fantastic." Again, it's not the cost of the plants that's the problem. The maintenance and watering, depending on what kind of summer we have, is really the critical part of it. And you have to commit to that long-term maintenance and watering as part of the upfront cost. And that's often what breaks the bank. And again, in terms of the metrics and what you're taking to your board, you have to put that whole cost in, not just the cost of we can get, 48 hanging baskets in town for X amount of money. No, that's cheap. The cost of watering them for the next, 14 weeks, that's the expensive bit, especially when we have a drought.
And I suppose my big ambitious vision of winning Britain in Bloom, it means that I need a really...
It's even more expensive.
Well, yeah, even more expensive. But if I don't achieve it and we never get it, I guess the comeback will be, you spent all this money on all of this. We didn't get the award, which made us the destination. And therefore, yes, it made us nicer and prettier, great for us. But actually, we needed the result, which was going to put us on the map where people were going to travel over the country to come and view us for that reason.
And there's a real practical bit about watering, because you've got to work out where you're going to get the water from and how you're going to water the things. And are you going to get a bowser? And if you're going to get a bowser, how big will it be? And what will you need to push or pull it? And then where will you store it? And will that cost you money to store it? I don't want to be a Jonah here. I'm just kind of flagging. It's quite complicated. It's not as easy as it thinks, as you think. And it's quite interesting that I think probably every bid manager or bid staff member gets utterly frustrated by the levy payer who rings them and says, "Why can't you just do that?" We're demonstrating why we can't just do that. Yeah, it's tough.
Okay, let's see if I can draw out some different challenges, different elements. Let's go for a few ideas. I'm going to go for a safety and crime reduction initiative. I'm thinking about adding some radios in, distributing the radios around the businesses. I want to catch or reduce crime. That's a growing problem, increasing focus for bids in the country at the moment. That's what I want to do.
Good. Okay. How many radios will you buy?
I need 50.
Which businesses will they go to? Is this for daytime or nighttime?
So I've got some data on which are the 50 most crime affected shoplift related crime. That's specifically what I'm targeting. So I'm going to give my 50 radios to those.
So
50.
That's all daytime.
It's 40 of them are daytime and 10 of them are nighttime. Not quite sure what you're shoplifting at the night, but run with me.
And how many staff do you have in the bid?
There's just 3 of us.
Okay, so who will be running the radio scheme from the bid side?
I have my operations and logistics manager, so it'll fall under their responsibility.
And do they work day and night then? Will they be managed the daytime radio system and the nighttime one?
That's an interesting point. I just decided actually that I'm just going to be a daytime scheme. And yes, we're gonna tackle daytime.
Okay, that's probably a sensible start. And then the scale of businesses that you're talking about, are they all independent, kind of one person, or is it a mixture of big business and small business?
There's a mixture. Yeah.
And have they committed to allocating a person in each of the businesses to always operate the radio?
We've visited them. We've spoken to them, and they say they are interested in doing that, and they are going to have it available for their
And will it link
staff.
to the police, and is there a CCTV as well?
Oh, now you're exposing my lack of knowledge about how this works. Do they typically? Is that an option?
I mean, well, so here's the thing about radios. Radios can be really useful.
I know one bid manager who swears by it, says that's so the businesses love that they've done that, implemented it. And
they can be, and in some places they can really work. I guess again, I'm being a bit facetious because radios don't work in their own right by just being there. You don't purchase the radios and then you have a scheme. It takes quite a lot of time to train everybody train the team who's going to own the system and train the other end of it who's going to hold the radio. And there needs to be a daily call-in the beginning of every day, start time of every day, to get everyone checking in to the radio. So everybody signs in each morning, and somebody needs to be available to do that.
Yeah.
And ideally, they need to be linked to the police as well. So you want police agreeing to hold radios, and/or if there's a CCTV scheme where there is a control centre that is manned, then it needs to be linked to there. Otherwise, what do the radios do? They're talking to each other.
Yeah.
But are they getting anywhere with it? So if your motivation for getting radios is to reduce crime, to reduce shoplifting, and Mr. Smith, who's taken on a radio and is very excited about using this new radio and thinks it's the be-all and end-all, and he's got organised crime come into his store and they've just looted him, but he's on the radio, but no one's listening.
Yeah.
What's it achieved?
Yeah, of course. Because I often hear bids talking about a number, tens of thousands typically, of goods that have been intercepted and returned to the stores.
Yeah.
But I'm also seeing stores where they're no longer putting security on their doors. Some big stores as well, and serious that have serious shoplifting problems. And I wonder, let's say the cost of radios is relatively little, got these issues to sort out so the management and implementation works. But I can imagine that the number that we end up with returned goods is much greater than the cost of implementing it.
Yeah.
I guess my question I'm sort of asking myself here is, so what? When the stores themselves are reducing their security burden, that feels like a difficult situation.
Yeah, and it's happening a lot, actually. We've got quite a lot of, I shall resist naming major chains, but we've got a lot of big chains have been reducing their in-store security and leaning on a bid to provide the security for them. And the answer to that is, we can't operate on behalf of an individual levy payer. We're operating in the town for the benefit of all, and we're being a conduit. We're operating in public space. We can't be security on someone's private space. So the radio scheme should only be the communicating conduit that gets something else, gets police, gets CCTV looking at it, gets some other support if the bid, for example, also funds its own private security provision, gets a ambassador range or whatever they're called on site. If it can create an answer, an action, it has a real purpose. If it's just talking to each other, it's questionable the level of purpose. It can still give some reassurance, some store reassurance to staff, and it can still share information. But there's other means of sharing crime information as well. But yeah, it's not just the radios themselves. And the other thing I would say is, I often speak to bids who say, "Oh yeah, we've got 68 radios." I say, "How many get turned on daily?" "Ah, well, that's a lot less."
That's back to your having an appointed representative in each.
And having an answer, because if they get more and more frustrated by not being answered because the police aren't responding, because CCTV is no longer manned throughout the day because there's no other resource, what's the point in holding the radio and speaking to it if no one's answering? So they go, "Oh, forget that. It's just a pain."
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try and redeem myself now.
Okay.
And the next one is I'd like to do a digital town app.
Oh, well, you know more about this than me.
Well, hopefully I can make the case that
okay, right. So a digital town app, right?
Yeah.
So, what would the app be for? Who's that aimed at?
So I think with an app we can have it doing different things for different members of the community and different members of the business community. So we've already touched on with My Light Festival. How are we going to record? How are we going to create a legacy of who's been to that festival? And so the app is going to play a part in every event or trail that we run throughout the year, because we're going to use the app as a core piece of our infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
to try and capture a digital community of people around the place. We want to capture that community so that we can retarget them, encourage them to come back in more often, spend more money. Sometimes it might be a light trail in the evening. We're going to do that annually.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be, actually, we're running a restaurant week, and these are the restaurants that are taking part in the restaurant week.
Yeah.
So our app will have trails, it'll have deals, it'll have loyalty schemes, events, and different businesses will get different things from it. So a small independent business might want a loyalty scheme. That loyalty scheme, if they went to an independent app, would be £40 to £100 a month.
Okay.
So of the value of replacing that with a town one is, you could argue is £400 to £1,000 a year just for one small independent business.
Wow.
Whereas there's a whole street we're struggling to get people to go down. We're going to have every trail. We're going to make sure we've got a location on there to bring people down that street. I think there's lots of
What's your mobile phone coverage in your town?
Pretty good, but it is patchy in places.
Okay.
Thankfully, I work with a very good provider called Vicinity, whose new app platform is offline first.
Oh, okay.
So the apps actually will work offline.
Okay.
Once downloaded.
Right.
So once downloaded,
yes,
large parts of the apps will work offline. So
okay.
Particularly we've got a shopping centre, and so that shouldn't be too much of a problem.
And what's the it's a genuine question because I don't know the answer to
that
this.
Was a genuine answer.
No, I know. Actually, it's all very genuine, but this one I genuinely, as you were speaking, I don't know the answer to this. How do you get around the GDPR issue of capturing people's information and then reusing it for them for loyalty? Are they signing up at the point they sign the app, or are they signing up at each point they use a trail or something?
Yes. So I guess it firstly depends on what you're capturing.
Yeah.
And why you're capturing it. It tends to be we capture the bare minimum for what we need to deliver what the app is delivering. So, name, contact information, and location is often very important because they're doing a trail, something like that. So it's not a huge amount of data that we collect. But yeah, there are.
But they presumably accept that in the terms when they take on.
Yes, when you take on the app. And I suppose the app is about telling you.
Yeah.
Its very definition of its service is, this is an app for telling you what's going on in the place.
Yeah.
And about the businesses in the place.
Yeah.
So it's a bit. There's also I think quite a strong legitimate interest claim.
Yeah.
But let's have a consent basis as well.
Yeah. And what's the workload in? So if you're a small bid and there's only you and two others, and one of the others is really busy with a radio scheme, and the other one's up all night doing the light festival.
Yeah.
What's the workload in getting kind of buy-in and set up initially on this app, but then each time you have another intervention? Like what level of workload? And I say that partly with, again, slightly facetiously, because I think people never think about just how time-consuming it is to then communicate with businesses and get offers, for example.
Yeah.
And when that's all manual, like you chase your tail constantly.
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges of implementing an app, but also I think one of the biggest opportunities, because what it forces you to do is to engage regularly with businesses.
Right.
So you need to have, and we've talked a lot in previous episodes about boots on the ground, visiting places. It's always a good reason, a good excuse to visit a business, to share their data about what level of engagement they're getting on their app, how their latest deal is performing, etc. So I think it's a good reason to do it, but it's also shouldn't be underestimated. The apps where we've seen them most successful is where there have been the best relationships between the bid and the businesses. Right. So if you don't have that, it's always a harder starting point.
Because I think way back, actually, there was the presumption. This is the same with a number of different sort of, let's call them service areas in the bid industry. There was a presumption that the bid could almost outsource a task to a provider, and that was the job done. But they're outsourcing merely the machinery and wherewithal to you. They've still got to do the job, haven't they? They've still got to know the businesses and engage and everything else.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so what's the costs on this?
Oh, well, that's varies depending on what you want. But it looks like for the app that we're considering in this hypothetical place, it looks like it's going to be about 10 to 15 grand a year.
Okay. And what's the sense of percentage of businesses that are just not going to engage digitally?
It probably goes back to your question on engage, because I think you will get involved and promoted on an app in some way, at least 60-70% of those businesses. Of them, you'll have a range of engagement from those that are a trail location once or twice a year, to those that have a deal, to those that have a loyalty scheme, which is their business's loyalty scheme, and therefore they are heavily engaged every day. So a mix of engagement. But I mean, we've got on some of the apps, so I'm sort of jumping between two hats, but I put a deal on the other day which was 10% off urns, headstones and keepsakes for a funeral directors. The next one I put on was 15% off at Ann Summers. It was quite a bizarre
random
combination of deals I was putting on, all on the same place app. So it's very broad what you can.
And excuse me, and I guess the sort of outcome. So when we're talking about a typical bid with 2-3 staff in a typical size location that might have between 300 and 400,000 pounds a year, 10k then feels quite affordable and almost feels like it might go under the radar too much, and then not enough sense of thinking about measurement. But actually measurement is even more critical on this, isn't it? Because it becomes the cue for lots of other things beyond it. So what's the metrics on this? What data can you capture? What data do you provide back to a bid? What will a bid be saying to their board as to the value of it? Because it's in danger of coming into the nice to have unless it's used well. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think probably on that cost we need to include the costs of the people, or a percentage of time. So I think a typical bid, it's probably a part-time role, doing the business engagement, and not purely for the app. I'm thinking of one example where we've got an app which is 4 different bids together. But they have someone who every day is engaging for a couple of hours with those businesses to talk specifically about the app in some way, shape or form. So if you're one location, that probably becomes, at least sort of a day a week where you're either doing business engagement or social media promotion. Marketing in some way, shape or form. You're probably doing this anyway. It's just giving you the topic of conversation when you visit a bid or when you're doing the social media. But we should include some of that cost. So let's double that in terms of internal cost and external cost. And then in terms of metrics and data, I mean, there's a lot potentially. So on the business side, what businesses are involved, what businesses are promoted, what's the engagement like with those businesses. We can be quite detailed. We'll know that this business has had 4 offers on that have redeemed, 1,000 times by 5,000 people. That would be an exceptional deal, by the way.
I was going to say, that sounds good if you can achieve that.
Phenomenal. From the user point of view, number of registered users, monthly active users, and something we've been asked for in the past, but we need to probably look into more, is actually the question you were saying earlier about postcodes. Where have people come from? We could collect that and give the bid an idea of where they've come from. That's something we should be looking at.
I mean, I think that's a really interesting piece that I was just sort of pulling my mind out slightly from it being an app and it actually being part of a wider marketing comms promotional strategy for the town. When we go back to basics and say, what difference does a bid make to us businesses? Why are we here? And it goes back to those core things of clean, safe and promoted, are the kind of core things with different words and different language, and the core things that we are concerned with. So we should be seeking to find ways of creating group promotional activities that, like you said earlier, that economies of scale by doing it jointly via the bid rather than individually. I mean, back in the day, I'm so long in the tooth I can remember this. Back in the day, part of the justification of coordinated marketing campaigns was it saved individual businesses paying for their own newspaper ad. Honestly, I'm that old. Um, but this is the kind of modern version of it, isn't it? What
Yeah, I suppose
businesses
so.
would do individually, we can do collectively much better, but also much cheaper. And then we can create a sector focus, a district focus, a time, day of the week focus that starts driving business in to perhaps untapped markets. Perhaps sometimes you've got a location that's got a brilliant one single business that if we shout about that, they're going to attract a load of other people to come alongside them. Something that's quite unique. But equally, if you've got a shoulder season where routinely the place is really quiet in February, that's the time you do the restaurant week. It's all these kind of things to think about. And that's what bids absolutely should be doing. And that's where I think I worry when bids decide they're doing something because the neighbouring place did it rather than because their place needs it. Because places are different and needs and catchments and everything are different. And I like the idea of getting down into the granular data of who is using the app and therefore who are your customers and what can you do with them.
I think that mirrors with the journey that we've kind of been on from a place where we're one app for lots of different places to now having branded apps for different places where they do different things. So we could have a centre of London app which is replacing a loyalty card or a privilege card in one place, and it's all about deals. But actually, in the Valleys of Wales, we've got a walking or trail app, which again you're then linking the trails with the businesses, and it's a vehicle, it's a mechanism for different places. So hopefully I've done that one.
I think that's quite good. I think that one's pretty good, but it should be, shouldn't it? Because that's your core business.
I should be more polished at understanding the value proposition and measuring the impact of that one. How are we doing for time? Should we try and squeeze 2 more quick ones in?
Okay.
Let's go for, actually, let's not do that. Let's do shopfront improvements.
Oh,
no.
okay.
No. Shopfront improvement.
Shopfront improvements.
I've got some shoddy shopfronts, and thankfully I've managed to get a grant from somewhere.
Already feeling better.
Excellent.
Okay.
But we're just going to be the ones who are topping that up to make sure that we can make this particular row look a bit better, and the whole place will benefit as a result.
Okay. Yeah. So there are valid schemes, don't get me wrong, but this is another complex one that's so much more complicated than it first appears. And it's one that you often have, again, a levy payer or a resident or a local person. Why can't you just tidy all this up? Well, because they're not our buildings, because there's a whole load of permissions required, because to be able to even maintain, fix and decorate those shop fronts, we're going to have to put scaffolding up, which costs a fortune, and we're going to have to get permission to do that. We might even need to close the road whilst we do it. Like, the disruption factor can be massive just to get the principles off the ground. But more importantly, and why I'm less nervous when you say there's a grant, you have to be very, very careful about using pooled levy money from hard-working businesses to effectively subsidise into the pocket of one business. One cafe subsidises the improvement of another that potentially takes their business away. So that balance has to be really carefully considered. And where there's a grant scheme, conservation funds or some regeneration funds, and that money is what's being used, but the bid can be a conduit or be, the go-between for the businesses and then feed in and assist in the applications to get permissions. That's quite valid. But I get quite nervous about, if you've got 300k and you're going to spend 80 on it, on 6 shops.
Yeah.
How do the rest of the businesses feel?
I think that's what's screaming out to me from going through this exercise is your input-output metrics. It's
Yeah.
not just as a bid as a whole, we've had
Yeah.
this much in and this much
Mm.
actually on a project basis.
Yeah.
And it's okay that perhaps you're with some grant funding,
Yeah.
you have benefited 6 businesses, as
Yeah.
long as your next project is
Yeah.
benefiting this other
Some
group of
other
businesses.
group.
And then
Exactly.
across the
Yeah.
whole remit,
Yeah.
everyone feels
Yeah.
like they've had some
Yeah.
benefit.
And also the scale of work associated, for example, with shopfront improvements, that's an enormous scale of work required. So if you've only got a team of 3, even if it's someone else's money you're using, if you as a resource in the team are getting heavily bogged down by managing that, what else are you not doing for the levy payers because you're spending all the time on that? So that balance is really hard. It sounds like I'm turning down every project. I'm not, but the more you think deeply about each project and you think about the principle of us being holders of an investment portfolio on behalf of the businesses, you've got to then really drill down and understand whether it's right to use that money and that time in there. And if you do, as you say, you've got to balance up in the next 6 months of the year or the next 2 years of the bid that another sector gets the value. So that overall, when you look across the 5 years and you go back to ballot, you genuinely have that input and output measure, that matrix that is measuring across all sectors and all geographies of the town, and you haven't favoured just one little corner.
I think what we should do, because I had other ones which I thought were going to take us down different routes, is actually pause there and put it out to listeners to say, what
Yeah,
are their
let's do it.
projects
Yeah.
that they're considering, and let's help them come
Yeah.
up ways they can evidence that they're
Yeah.
making the right decision, that they're going to be doing the
Yeah,
delivery.
that's a great
and the
challenge.
review.
And you're just getting off the hook because you're
I'm
scared that I'm
getting
going to challenge you anymore.
I've respected bid managers already, but I've got newfound respect for the difficulties of doing any of these things now. So do let us know what projects you're finding particularly challenging, about how
Yeah.
thinking whether you should do them, whether you shouldn't, maybe those that are at idea stage, and we can just throw them
Yeah.
about, and then give us an opportunity to perhaps revisit some of the ones that we've not had a chance to come to. But I think this is doing the aim we set out, which was how are we making evidence-based decisions, and how are we evidencing that we're making the right ones, that it's
Yeah.
benefiting the businesses.
Yeah. And how do we prove receipted value to levy payers when we go back to ballot and we want them to vote again, and a small business is paying us £250? What value can we show them that we've given them over the period? Same as the bigger business that's paying us £4,000 or £5,000. What value have we receipted back to them through the various different services we've done? Because we can't just do nice to have services in a place that actually businesses might think is okay, but hasn't benefited them, and they think somebody else should have paid for it. We have to get that balance right.
And the key thing about your phrase, that receipted value, what does receipted mean?
Well, so when you go back, particularly when you go back to ballot and you list that matrix of projects, and actually some bids do this really well. Sam in Worcester does this really well on her billing leaflet now. So her billing leaflet annually, she actually prices each of the service areas that they're delivering and shows the value a business can get from that service area. So training, there's this amount of, and it's free to you, but the cost would have been this. It's, each thing. So you're receipting, you've paid us £800 in bid levy, but we've shown you, if you've utilised even only 60% of our services, you've got £1,000 receipted back.
Right. So
it makes it the bid levy net zero or better,
Yeah. So every business see the value added.
Yeah.
I paid in £20, but I got a hanging basket worth 40.
Yeah.
I feel quids in.
Yeah. And somebody watered it for me, hopefully.
Yes. It stayed alive. And we got to be a Britain in Bloom winner, and loads of people came.
And you measured them on your app.
And we measured it on their app. Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting point, though, isn't it? These things can coincide. And actually, the overall value of a bid to someone who's questioning that is, look at these projects that wouldn't be happening without it, where the collective action of coming together and where you've got people who've got the time,
Yeah.
although challenging,
Yeah.
to think deeply about
Yeah.
these challenges on behalf of a community of businesses in the place. What tremendous
Yeah.
value.
Breadth. I always encourage breadth of thinking because it's quite easy to be one-trick ponies and do that okay. But to actually get breadth of projects, breadth of services, breadth of influence, breadth of relationships, so that you are going to touch all of the sectors. You're not going to miss people out. And some are easier to deliver for than others, but so that you can find a way of giving everybody some value.
Brilliant. And on that, let's conclude our series on what makes a good bid. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.